Kat, so much. Such a great intro there. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking time out to join me, particularly as it's kind of, I guess, early in the morning for you over in the US. So just to start off with, obviously you've done a great intro there explaining your current position at NASA. What I'm fascinated about is what was the kind of pivotal moment when you realized that you could have a career in science, and what has kind of kept you pursuing that career, and kind of also not only pursuing that career and achieving so much in it, but also you've also gone on to do multiple post-degree qualifications, which again, was juggling a busy life and a job is really difficult. So what's kept you motivated, and what can women who maybe thinking about a job in STEM, whether it be for NASA or maybe not even as exciting as that, what can they do to kind of set themselves up for success, do you think?
That's a great question, Daniel. Great series of questions. So I would probably say that the pivotal moment for me where I really found a strong fascination in human-centric science was probably when I started an undergrad position when I was working for the Air Force Research Lab. That's when I discovered a really interesting field called human factors. So for people that might be unfamiliar, it's a very interesting blend of psychology and human-centered engineering design. And it really opened a lot of doors for me because I had this strong interest in, kind of the human condition, the human experience. When I did initially start off undergrad, I was pre-medicine, and I was interested in psychiatry. And it wasn't until long when, after I started working for the Air Force, that I really wanted to switch that and kind of pursue a more kind of applied research approach. So that's really what inspired me to pursue the field of human factors and go and get my PhD. And so after, the Air Force, I started doing research for the Army Research Institute. And that was also really interesting, but it was very much, applied psychology, but it really taught me a lot about organizations and human behavior and performance. And it really gave me an interesting perspective in terms of how many fields of science touch each other and overlap when it comes to understanding how to improve the overall, whether it be human experience, human performance, and across, a lot of different very extreme environments. So I would probably say that having that blend really led me into kind of pursuing a different track for my PhD. I originally started as applied experimental psychology, and by the end of my dissertation, I was, doing a kind of a dual dissertation with psychology and physics, and that's where I really discovered psychophysics, and obviously blending that into space and human space exploration. I was dead set at that point on getting into NASA. So, and that's a pretty interesting story, actually, how I ended up at NASA.
Go ahead. I'd love to hear that. I'm sure the audience.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't think I actually ever told you this. So, I was doing a postdoctoral study at University of Central Florida in industrial engineering, and I was wrapping up my dissertation at the time. And I was on a listserv that through my Army connections for NASA's Human Research Program investigators workshop. So essentially, this is an internal workshop that basically it is open to the public, but it's predominantly, at least back at the time, was focused on NASA's internal investigators. So at the time, I ended up submitting my poster, but this was back in the day where you needed to kind of list a grant number because obviously when they're evaluating this, they want to be able to tie the projects back to a particular research grant that they funded. And so I just ended up hitting in a bunch of numbers until it was accepted. So I was very determined back in the day, and I'm not, yeah, not ashamed of that at all, actually. So when I did put up my poster at this conference, I was the only one that I couldn't technically put a NASA logo on it because the subspecialization that I was introducing, lunar psychophysics, though it was very NASA relevant, it was not actually funded by NASA at the time. So I put my poster up along with 200 other posters, and I gave them my pitch, and it ended up actually placing third out of 200 plus posters. So, and that actually is what led to discussions, and obviously engaging with people to, just becoming the senior scientist of NASA's Human Research Program. So that was very exciting. And also, it was a very bold move. So I guess the number one thing I would probably suggest is, to women in STEM is there's nothing, you can never be too bold when it comes to making those decisions because, yes, it was taking a little bit of a risk, but it was a very good one. And I think that a lot of times women in STEM I've noticed, they tend to feel like they have to be very conscientious of their performance, and often feel like that maybe they're under a little bit more criticism than some of their peers. And I think that that boldness factor, definitely I would encourage a lot of women to take advantage of that, because we all have it in us. I know I'm not the only one out there. So yeah, that's probably the number one thing I would say is
So the make it happen mindset was what helped you, I guess,
absolutely,
make it
yeah.
happen with NASA at that time. And
Yeah.
obviously, your boldness has continued throughout your career. I know that there's exciting things happening for you in the near future, which maybe if we get the chance, we'll explore next time round. But what do you think? I mean, has there been a big change in the time that you've been with NASA as to the percentage of women that are now securing jobs in STEM, and is there a positive kind of feeling amongst the women that that within the industry, is it in the wider industry, that is becoming more open and accessible?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate in my program. We have a lot of women in a lot of leadership roles in my program. So I can really only speak to HRP. I can't really extend outside of that. But I definitely would say that there has been a very positive transition to being more inclusive. I think that there is still work to be done in terms of, women, minorities, and people of color in general. I'm hoping to see more of that kind of evolve. NASA has started programs to kind of support that at the university level. So I think that that's the most important thing too, is maintaining accessibility to, universities that are, basically both minority serving, but also, making sure everyone gets fair opportunities as well. I think that that's something that's really important. And NASA has been spearheading that for a while. But I'm seeing a lot more diversity coming through, which is very exciting for me. We're getting a lot of great young scientists in there, and our goal is to keep them. We want to make sure that we can not just give them internships, but also create opportunities where they can build a career at NASA if they want to. And forging that path, bureaucracy and government, there's things are a little bit slow moving, but ultimately that's the most important thing is, we want to give them more than just an internship. We want to see them make a career out of that in STEM the best way that we can.
And from you, obviously looking back at the younger you, because you're still young, like the kind of teen you, did you think this was a career that was ever going to be available to you, or was this something that, like, a bit of a pipe dream, and then through your boldness and mindset, you've kind of made a path for yourself?
Yeah, so I had no idea when I was a teenager that I would end up being, you know, end up being where I am. I think there's a few factors that go into that, but I am the first person in my family to achieve, a PhD. But a lot of times I think that, growing up in the Midwest and, greater Detroit area, we definitely, a lot of good schools, but the best decision I made was to kind of really venture out. And I've lived in so many different places around the US at this point, and just kind of exposing myself to new experiences. I think that that's something that I really did not expect to do when I was a teenager, for sure. But I do think that something that I wish I had more of was accessibility to people that, were able to kind of create opportunities for me. I often had to chase the majority of mine. So I definitely always try and give that back, whether it's, when I teach, or just being a mentor to students, or just people in general. That's always something that really resonates with me.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. I think we all kind of rise up on other people's shoulders, and the more shoulders that you can climb upon to help you achieve your goal, in a positive way, obviously the better. So in terms of kind of the science route, what kind of disciplines do you think are where there's the biggest opportunities at the moment? Where do you see science going over the next? I mean, obviously with the advent of AI and all of the other stuff that is going on at the moment in technology, where do you see the future of STEM and the jobs that that's going to potentially create?
That's a great question. So I mean, I'm probably going to miss some here, when I'm mentioning, but honestly, I've seen an uptick in honestly all the fields when it comes to the need for scientists and scientific research. But you mentioned AI, and at least in our neck of the woods, with NASA and human research and performance, yeah, AI is definitely going to become a big thing. And when it comes to understanding computational modeling, computer science, I see a lot of, biologists and chemists and just applied researchers across the board, engineers, having to kind of acquire an understanding of that, computational undertone when it comes to modeling and understanding and whether it's, reinventing the wheel or trying to just improve on an existing, prototype model or what have you. I think that there is definitely an uptick in both, yeah, AI, but also just, accessibility to information.
Yeah.
So I think that, yeah. And so I see that, I think it's great, honestly, that I wish, I don't know what it would be like, back in the day, even, when I was taking, my PhD program doing statistics, we had to write everything out by hand and memorize everything by hand. So things have changed a lot since then. So, but I would probably say that the access to information is incredibly large. I would probably, the one piece of advice I would probably give women in STEM and also just students in STEM in general is to make sure to check your sources, maybe more often than not the old-fashioned way. I do see that there is kind of a need to have that deep understanding of information, especially when you're working with things like ChatGPT, OpenAI. It's such an amazing tool, but I really encourage STEM students to not use it too much of a crutch because yeah, because once you get to the expert level, and I have used ChatGPT enough to know, it gets things wrong. It really does. And if you are an expert like yourself, Daniel, if you want to test it, it may not always give you kind of that depth of knowledge that is so valuable. So it's definitely kind of learning how to balance yourself, where it's the deep personal study, but also being able to optimize those tools' accessibility, to the best
Yeah,
that you're
you've
used
got to
to.
fact check 100%. I mean, when I
Yeah.
started, I remember doing research for developing our first product, and I literally had to go to a library and photocopy research papers. You weren't even allowed to take them out of the library, and you had to pay like 10p for a copy if it was black and white, and 20p if you wanted color. And you'd have to go there. Obviously, it didn't have even contactless payment or even really credit card, but that big a thing back then. You had to go there with coins. So yeah, things have definitely moved on. I think yeah, your advice about check your sources is probably even more relevant today than it was 5, 10, even 20 years ago. So yeah, great point. And but do you think that the use of this new technology will then obviously develop new branches of STEM, which we haven't even thought of yet? That 25, 10 years ago, I guess if you look at social media, there's probably a whole industry now that is built on the back of social media, and those jobs just didn't exist. Do you anticipate the same going to happen in STEM?
I think that I could see a lot more maybe integrated areas of study. I mean, we have our core areas of science, and those are never going to change. What I do anticipate is there's going to be a lot more overlap between them. And I see that a lot in NASA already, and also, in my role, I was overlapping, fields all the time. And I think that, when you're kind of applying, this knowledge with a skill set and, to conduct a research study or to answer a question or pursue something, I think that the biggest takeaway is that it's going to be more overlapping and interdisciplinary, which means the topics might become more complex. And we do see a lot of overlapping fields, particularly in human centered research, because we're all those fields essentially put together. All STEM is relative. There's a common point between all of those when you're taking a human centric approach. So absolutely, when it comes to human performance research, I do anticipate fields intersecting a lot more frequently, and also finding more innovative ways of becoming more applied as
And
well.
obviously, one of the other, I guess, difficult things, let's say, you've made the decision, you've got the support to go and further your education at whatever level that is in the, down a STEM route. What do you think? How can people set themselves up for success in order to find that, sometimes getting your foot in the door is the hardest thing. So, you've got this amazing qualification, you've spent 3, 4, 5, even maybe 7 years acquiring all this knowledge and these amazing qualifications. What would you say, what tip would you give to try and get your foot in the door? Obviously, you mentioned earlier about that bold move you pulled, you know, and out of 200 people, you know, then you know, coming in number 3, which is amazing. Is that the kind of thing that you think people need to do, and what's the best way to go about that, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would probably say that you know, it's one of those things where if you're a student and you're not sure what you want to do, I see this a lot in students where they're afraid of picking the wrong field. They're so afraid of doing the wrong thing that sometimes they experience this kind of form of paralysis in their decision making where they almost like a functional freeze where they don't want to mess up, you know, their trajectory in life. And to that I say, you know, if you were to look at my resume, there's a lot of things that I did that are not necessarily relevant, but I still took them and it still got me somewhere. And so
Mm.
taking the wrong path does not necessarily mean that it's wrong, but it is a path. And so when you are not entirely certain, you know, definitely don't be afraid to take a step, even if you're not certain that you want that. But looking for opportunities and people that are accessible to you. So
Mm.
being an NASA scientist, the number one thing I strive to be, and also part of being, you know, a professor is making yourself accessible. So a lot of times when you have students, you know, there's a lot of times where I've had students come up to me and they tell me like, I've never met a person from NASA before. And, I
Mhm.
think a lot of people, when they are in these successful roles, they take that for granted and they kind of forget that when you do get to a certain level in research experience and you become more siloed in your communities, it sometimes can be harder to actually become accessible in a way that actually reaches out to students that may have not had those opportunities.
Mm.
So a lot of times, when I teach my classes, my students are hearing for the first time what human factors is. If they didn't take that class, they wouldn't have known. So when it comes to kind of unique, interesting fields that maybe a little bit more nuanced, making yourself accessible is extremely important. So to the students that, are interested in trying to pursue that, don't be afraid of reaching out to people. I mean, I don't know how many, I'm sure you have a lot of listeners on your podcast, Daniel, so I might be shooting myself in the foot for saying this, but reach out to me, because I get messages on LinkedIn all the time from people that are interested about NASA and learning about NASA. And I never say no to anyone who's interested, because that's how I personally, found my mentors, was someone took the time to at least have a conversation with me. And so don't be afraid of asking and reaching out and going online and finding people that have similar interests to you. You'd be surprised that it gets you a lot farther than you think. And not every failure you have is really a failure, So when it
Yeah,
comes to things like that, success can also be,
hidden.
considered a failure. You can be a successful failure when it comes to trying. And that's the thing, you talk about all my accomplishments, but no one sees my rap sheet of failures, where I have a whole list
Feel
over
free.
here. Right, and so it's like you got to be okay and comfortable with not achieving your goal on the first try.
Yeah,
And being comfortable with making yourself uncomfortable is probably the best piece of advice I can give. And it also tests you and make sure that, is this really what you want to do?
yeah,
Because you, yeah, so,
100%. I think, I think what's the term? Fail fast and get on with it, I guess.
yeah.
Basically. So go on. You've mentioned a failure. I can't believe you had a failure. Tell me your most spectacular failure then.
Spectacular failure.
So, literally flames and all.
He's in awe. Oh gosh. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I'll be honest, I was not, and I always tell my students this, I was not a good student,
Yeah.
because if I didn't like it, I wouldn't engage with it. And so I definitely have failed classes for sure in college. I just didn't really find, I didn't have, my heart wasn't in it. But also being, a woman in STEM, looking back on it, I also realized that a lot of the classes I failed, I felt like I couldn't really have any peers in the room. Like, for example, if I had, a calc class and I didn't have a study group, for example, because let's say I was the only girl in there and it was predominantly, I was out of 30 students, me being the pre-med slash psych, person in a room of engineering calc, individuals, I didn't really fit in. And that's something too that I'm hoping to see more of a shift of as well, where kind of making it more accessible for women and minorities in STEM to feel comfortable enough in the classroom to learn things. So I think that that's probably, I wouldn't say that's my most spectacular failure. I mean, I've applied to the astronaut candidate program. I applied before I was even legally eligible. So that was an immediate rejection. I wasn't even 26 yet during my first time. So, but that was expected. I mean, yeah, there's grants I've applied for that I didn't get. I mean, there's jobs I've applied for where, I wasn't considered, but it's just, you know, it's just life. But every failure has led me to this point. So in one way or another, I'm glad that they happened. And I think failure, you learn more through that sometimes than succeeding, because it really causes you to reflect on things. Why did this happen? What could have I done differently, and so
100%.
forth.
All right,
Yeah.
well, look, I'm really conscious of your time, because I know you've probably got to send a rocket up or something, or be responsible for a rocket going up. So what would your kind of three I know it's hard to narrow it down to three, but what would your three kind of big recommendations to people who are considering a career path similar to your own, whether it be here in the States or wherever, in order to set themselves up as much as possible for success?
Definitely see where, if you're looking, start local. So, if you're a student, whether it's high school, undergrad, or even grad, look at, if you're trying to, for example, we'll use the space sector. Look what local communities, gatherings, chapters that exist, in your local communities. You'll be surprised. That's probably the best piece of, first advice I can give for that is creating a local connection to communities, student chapters, organizations, because they often have that reach that as an individual, obviously, may not necessarily have. Let's see, number two, I would probably say number two would be definitely, be bold. Like I was, talking about earlier on in the podcast, I think that um, be a little, shameless in your passion of wanting to, be somewhere. And I think you'd be surprised at how refreshing that is, especially to people that are very, been in the research field a long time. It's easy to, for older generations to get very complacent and comfortable in these roles. And so I think having that kind of youthful passion is very invigorating to a lot of organizations. So be very unapologetically enthusiastic about whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for number three, I would probably say is just, yeah, basically, don't be afraid to reach out to people. Do not be afraid to fail. So you basically, you'd be surprised just, it's better to do it and fail than not at all. I definitely,
You miss
so,
100% of the goals you don't go for.
exactly. So I know that sounds kind of generic, but at the end of the day, if you really apply that mentality to what you're doing, it really will set you up for a lot more success and make you much more resilient in that process, because pursuing STEM is not easy. And on top of that, you're also just dealing with the logistics of building a career in life, and the problems that come with that, everyone experiences as well. And so making sure that you're mentally, robust and ready for that, is going to set you up for the best success, I think.
Fantastic. Well, look, Dr. Kat, thank you so much for joining us today on the Make It Happen podcast. And I'm sure you're going to inspire a lot of men and women to go out there and make it happen. So thanks a lot. Have a great day.